I'm Gabe Lullo, and welcome to the Do Hard Things podcast. We're talking to go-to-market leaders and entrepreneurs who have conquered the challenges, the hustle, and the grind. Get ready for real talk, real insights, and no fluff.
But the hardest thing in the world right now is not actually closing deals, it's actually getting somebody's attention.
If you don't have that hook in that first 5 to 10 seconds, guess what? They're going to scroll to the next one.
You need to go in and you need to make it sound like yourself. That's the biggest piece of the puzzle. And I promise you, we can all tell.
The people that are trolls and the people that are haters never done the thing that you're doing.
I love doing this podcast because I get a front row seat to some of the greatest minds in sales.
Gone are the days of saying stay in your lane. When you're an executive leader and you're an enterprise-wide leader, there are no lanes. You've got to be partners.
Curiosity is like when the type of questions you ask is sometimes the value that you bring.
I need you to tell me when you're ready to buy or what you're ready to do. And I think it's changed so much into like adding more value. And if you're not doing that, then you're definitely going to come off as desperate.
High pressure selling is like a dinosaur tactic at this point.
No parent is like, oh, you should be a salesperson when you grow up, right? Everyone's like a doctor, lawyer, whatever crap. It's never salespeople.
It's not your job to motivate people. It's your job to find motivated people.
It's not cockiness. It's not arrogance. It's confidence knowing I know this and I know that I can help you.
From where I started to where I am today is all because I learned how to sell.
And there's too many people who have only been doing this for 5 freaking minutes. Sit down, close your mouth, actually go out there and get yourself beat up. Then come back and tell me if something is dead or not.
That is exactly why I started this podcast, because right there, that's the epitome of doing hard things.
Welcome back to the Do Hard Things podcast with Lexi and Gabe. Today's guest, Marc Tyler Nobleman, is an author, speaker, and pop culture archaeologist best known for uncovering a hidden truth behind one of the most iconic characters of all time, Batman. When Marc learned that Bill Finger, the uncredited co-creator of Batman, had been erased from history, he embarked on a 9-year against all odds campaign to right that wrong. Experts told him it was impossible, but Marc's relentless pursuit led to one of the most significant corrections in pop culture history, adding Finger's name to the official Batman credit line after 76 years. His story is the subject of the Hulu documentary Batman and Bill, which has moved audience around the world to tears. He's also delivered a powerful TED Talk, authored several books, including Bill the Boy Wonder, and even inspired the renaming of a New York City street. Marc has shared his story in nearly 20 countries across 5 continents, inspiring people to believe that even the most daunting changes can begin with just one person, a message he now carries forward through his writing and speaking. Marc, welcome to the show.
Welcome back, everyone, to the Do Hard Things podcast with your hosts, Gabe and Lexi. I am so excited about this one. You just heard the bio of our guest. I'm super pumped because as many of you know, my friends and family know very well, and Marc does as well. I'm a big Batman fan. Not even close to, I thought I was a big Batman fan, and then I met Marc, and then I didn't realize how big of a Batman fan you can be. I think he's the biggest in the world, frankly, and you'll know why in a moment. We just heard your bio, Marc, and I also want to let our audience members know that this is going to be a little bit of a different take on our podcast. Usually we got 30, 40 questions ready to go, and then we get into a very in-depth back and forth with our guests. This is unique because Marc is, the man when it comes to all things Batman, and the story that he has been able to unpack is incredible. I urge you to watch it, his documentary on Hulu. I watched it. I cried. I had chills. My wife watched it. She said, this is the greatest documentary ever. I know Lexi watched it too. So we're going to talk a lot about the documentary, but I have come less prepared on purpose to ask fewer questions so Marc can share with us as much as he can about the story. So Marc, we're so excited to have you here. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Gabe and Lexi. It's a pleasure to be here. A deep pleasure.
Absolutely. So exactly. So let's start with this origin story. Let's go back, right? Because how did you first stumble across Bill Finger, and what made you care so deeply about, getting deep into this story and then sharing it with the world?
So I grew up a classic geek, and before that was cool. Now being a geek is a badge of honor. It wasn't in my childhood. And the biggest component of that was superheroes, and the biggest component of that was DC Comics superheroes, Superman, Batman, the Justice League. So I was a kid. I read comics as an escape, as a pleasure. I grew up and became a writer. And writers are always looking for great stories. If you're writing nonfiction, like I often do, I want an untold story. The dream is to find an untold story with a high profile hook. So, and the bigger dream is to find a high profile story with an untold hook that aligns with your interests, your existing interests. So I was blindsided in the early 2000s when I was reading an article in a comic book magazine that no one's heard of, which was talking about the creation of Batman and focusing on this guy, Bill Finger. And again, I was already a young adult. I'd grown up reading Batman comics, and I'd seen the name Bob Kane, countless times. He was the only person credited as the creator. So this was a huge shock to the system to find out that there was a second secret identity behind Batman, not just Bruce Wayne, but his original writer and co-creator, Bill Finger. So it was a mundane, reading of an article, but it did set me on this path to try to give this man his legacy back. So articles are great, and anything that talks about someone who did something as significant as Batman is welcome. But I felt that more needed to be done because Batman is a worldwide icon, and Bill Finger was instrumental and was completely left out of the official record. That was not just.
And let me unpack this, because in the documentary, it kind of blew me away. You were actually in a comic book store, and you showed, and by the way, I would say Superman is by far, number 1 or 2, right, when it comes to popularity or name recognition. But you showed this, it was a clip in the show where you showed that there's 1 to 2, rows of books or rows of comics in the store for Superman. Mm-hmm. But for Batman, it was like 7, right? It was crazy. The popularity and the size of Batman versus, number 2, which would be Superman, and so many others that are out there, all the other, comic figures. So how big was this when you started to realize and unpack the Bill Finger story? And how big do you think it is today?
Yeah, I mean, Batman is one of the most lucrative franchises of any kind of all time. Hello Kitty is bigger somehow, but Batman's up there. And he's not my favorite superhero, actually. Superman is still. But this story became obviously such a personal thing for me that he's now, I mean, they're equal on that in that sense. But Batman is more lucrative. I mean, one example is in 2011, DC Comics canceled every title that they were publishing, and they relaunched they started everything over. And they started with 52 different titles that would come out monthly. Of those 52 titles, 2 were Superman headliners and 13 were Batman headliners. So a quarter of the output was either a Batman headlining book or one of his supporting characters. That's how much of a cash cow he is for DC Comics and Warner Brothers. So, he needs no introduction, nor does Superman for that matter. But I mean, I've had the privilege of traveling the world to tell this story. And I've never been anywhere where I have to explain who Batman is, or even some of the supporting characters. I was in Thailand, and I do not speak Thai. I was in a taxi cab with a local driver, and he did not speak English, but he had a Batman sticker on his rear view mirror. So I pointed to the sticker and I said, Batman, and I gave him a thumbs up, and he said, Batman. And that's really all we needed to say to each other. It was
right, and
immediate bond.
You said something about the supporting character. I mean, look at the Joker.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I mean, how many actors have won Oscars by playing the Joker?
Yeah.
You got what Jack Nicholson did in the originals, right, with Keaton. Then you obviously look at what happened with Heath Ledger, and then now what we have with Joaquin Phoenix and Joker. Now it's its own movie franchise.
Yeah.
It's kind of incredible.
And that's Bill too. Bill co-created the Joker, Robin, Catwoman. I mean, you name it. I always say, stop a random grandmother in the supermarket and say, name 3 things that you know about Batman. And first of all, if she doesn't back away slowly, if she answers you, she will know 3 things. And whatever she says, it'll be almost guaranteed to be 3 things that Bill Finger contributed. That's how pervasive he was. Batcave, the nickname The Dark Knight, the name Gotham City. I mean, Bill Finger built this world in the shadows. Bob took center stage, hogged all the credit, and wanted that to be the story for all time. And I did not agree with that.
so awesome, and your story's so great. And most people, when they hear it can't be done, they give up. What made you keep going when the experts told you this change was impossible?
I put impossibility in perspective. And, opening a Starbucks on Jupiter, that's impossible. Removing your arms so that you can squeeze into a tight airplane seat, that's impossible. That's a stupid example, but you get what I'm saying. Getting a name added to a credit line is not even close to impossible. It just takes time and discipline. And I have those things. So I'm also persistent to a fault. So I just figured, if I could make the case and be civil and be persistent and consistent, I might get enough people to listen. And this time it worked. Doesn't always work, but it's always worth a try. I didn't want to look back on this feeling that I had when I learned about Bill and think I could have tried. I mean, it doesn't cost me anything except for time. And for a while it seemed like maybe reputation, when people were saying, look, you seem like a nice guy, but you're kind of making a fool of yourself because no one's been able to do this for 70 years. And you're not a DC Comics employee. You're not a lawyer. You're not even a member of the family. What are you going to do that no one else has been able to do? And I say, we all have a voice. It all starts with a voice. That's all you need. So I gave it a shot. It did not seem impossible to me. It seemed unlikely, but it didn't seem impossible.
Yeah, but I think you sell yourself short. I mean, giving it a shot is a lot different than spending 9 years, right? I mean, think about it. The name of the show is Do Hard Things. And I always talk about this, like, physical labor is hard. Like to your point before, like doing impossible things, like physically, is very challenging. I grew up in a very blue collar town. All my family members, one of them literally fell off of a roof when they were roofing a house, and, it had to claim disability. That's hard work. I'm in sales. Like, we talk to people for a living. I don't get bleed or get, a paper cut is probably as hard as it gets. In your world, though, I was watching the documentary and I was blown away because I saw two stories, right? I saw the story that you were telling, which was, the Bill Finger story. But then I saw your story about you pursuing this and going through the difficulties, because you got turned down a lot, right? I mean, you had a ton of dead ends, blockers come up, and you figured out ways to persevere. Take us through it. Like, what sustained that motivation through those tough, hard points, we like to call it on the show, of that journey?
It definitely was hard, and that's what makes it a good story in the end. Again, it's that I've just programmed this way. I'm just a persistent son of a gun. And when someone says no to me in this context, obviously in a research context, that's not a dead end. That's just a push to go to push harder. There are other aspects of life, obviously, where no is a firm no, and you have to respect that. But this is not one of those things. If I walked away from everybody who didn't want to cooperate or didn't think they knew something, I wouldn't have a story. Sometimes you have to tell people what they might know. It's like what Steve Jobs said about selling Apple products. We don't want to sell the customer what they want. We want to tell them what they want, and then they'll buy it. So I'm trying to tell people, oh, you think you don't have any photos of Bill. Well, you did attend a wedding that he attended. And even in the 60s, everybody took photos at weddings. Who would have photos from that wedding? That kind of thing. They wouldn't think of it, but I'm thinking of it. So what kept me going was not the fear of, well, really, I mean, some people wouldn't start because of the fear of failure. What keeps me going is the fear of not getting to the end. I just have to, as much as possible, get to the end of my whatever I'm trying to do. And again, this was a very open-ended, uncertain thing. It isn't like there was a blueprint for this that I could follow and guarantee myself that I get further. I didn't have that. So and also, you all know, as people that believe in doing hard things, that we all have to try to get better at not caring too much about what other people think. Even if it's positive, to be honest. I mean, believing your own hype or believing your own press. So I just knew that, first of all, this was justified to get Bill added, and that I knew that with time and with some good luck and some help, we could probably do it. And so that was my driving force. I didn't want to, spend all this time and then say, goose egg, failure. So part of it was saving face, but also, I felt like there wasn't resistance to the idea. there was just resistance to the logistics, and by that I mean the financial side of it. No one was saying, "Oh, Bill didn't do these things." I didn't have to prove the case. I just had to get them to see that that would be not only the right thing to do, but really in their best interest, I thought, as a company, to credit someone like that after all these years. I mean, it makes them look good in the end.
Sure.
And
So
when you were going through that whole journey, one of my favorite parts was when you were able to get in contact with someone from his family, which I thought was so incredible. What were the biggest walls you hit emotionally, logistically, and legally during your campaign for Bill Finger?
So yeah, it was tricky, Lexi, to find people that had new information, because the comics industry is pretty well documented, but Bill was not. He died in 1974, which is right on the cusp of fandom really exploding as a national force. I mean, that was, in those days, Comic-Con, the biggest Comic-Con in San Diego, was, hundreds of people. Now it's six figures. There's just, the city is overrun with people. It's a massive thing. So Bill died right before there would be a lot of attention paid and documented to someone like him. So the people I was trying to find in most cases were in their 80s or older, and they don't have Instagram accounts. They're hard to find. And if you find them, they're hard to get on board, because you basically are limited to calling them. And when you call, I don't want to characterize all seniors this way, but I can understand when you call a senior citizen, sometimes they're confused, or they don't, even if you're very clear what you're doing, they don't fully get it. So I would call these folks and say, my name is Mark. I write books, working on one about the co-creator of Batman, Bill Finger, whom I understand you knew. And sometimes they would say, "I'm not buying your book." And I'd say, "Oh, no, I'm not selling my book. I haven't even written a book yet. It may never be a book. I'm simply trying to get the story." And they would say, "Yeah, but I'm not buying your book." They would say it again, "I'm not buying your book." And I'd say, again, no obligation to buy anything. I'm just hoping for a couple minutes of your time. And eventually, sometimes they would come around, sometimes they wouldn't. And then I would look for their children, who would often be, people my age or a little older, because they're more prone to, they're just more nimble, and they would listen to me, and they might say, "Okay, let me talk to my mom. Let me talk to my dad." And then that often helped me get those people back on the phone, or get their attention a little bit. So that was one of the bigger challenges, just simply the generational difference. There were a couple of people that were dodgy or evasive, and I don't think they were harboring any major secrets. I think they were just people that I found that certain people feel like there's a need for privacy in areas where there really isn't. So sometimes I'm asking general questions, and they'd say, "Oh, I'm not going to talk about that." And I'd say, it's not really, I'm not asking for your social security number. I mean, it's not that private. The biggest one in that category was Bill did not serve in World War II.
Okay.
And I didn't think this would be relevant to my book, but I just wanted to know anyway why. Maybe it would factor in. And the one person I found who knew why wouldn't tell me. He said, "That's personal." And that made it more of a of a goal for me, but I still never found out. I even got Bill's, I even requested his military record from through the Freedom of Information Act. Didn't specify. So I still don't know why. But the fact that he said it was personal makes it more of a story. So sometimes you just have to accept the dead ends and realize that maybe it wouldn't have mattered anyway. And then you asked about family and emotion. Yeah, it was quite emotional. As you saw in the film, here I am just doing a story about the creator of a superhero, but there's a whole family backstory to this, which is highly dramatic and personal, and frankly, none of my business. But I was the only person coming around wanting to do this. And so Athena, Bill's granddaughter, his only grandchild, warmed to the idea of talking. Well, she was already happy to talk to me, but warmed to the idea of, fighting for this, even though her family had told her whole life, "Don't bother, because your dad tried and failed. Your grandfather never got anywhere, and nobody else has ever been able to do it." So she was, almost brainwashed into thinking there's no point. And here I am, Mr. Happy-Go-Lucky, coming along and saying, "I get all that, and I respect your family's perspective, but nobody knows more than anybody else what's going to work. So let's give it a try." And her reaction was basically at first, no, because what are we going to do? Call the 800 number for Warner Brothers and say, "Yeah, how do I add my grandfather's name to Bat?" No, it doesn't work like that. but we'll find our way. So again, all these challenges in the moment could be, there were different degrees of frustration or well, mainly frustration, but never enough for me to say, I'm done. I'm not going to invest any more time. It was always made me bite down harder.
And I love the personal story to Lexi's question, that you dove deep into that with Athena and the granddaughter. But there's also your personal story in the documentary too, which I'd love to unpack a little bit, because I relate to it, right? Your daughter was asking you, what do you do for work? And her response is Bill Finger, right? And it's so cool to see. And I have a daughter also. And so, she calls me the boss of sales to her friends, right? She, on the way to drop off her to school every day, we're playing a game of what would you do when someone says this, right? They were doing objection handling and rebuttal handling, because it's what I do every day. I teach people how to sell. So it's so ingrained in our family. My wife works from home too, and my daughter's always around us over the summertime, and she sees what we do. And you really uncover that a little bit within your family. Walk us through the importance of that, whether you're an author and journalist like yourself, whether you're a creator like yourself, or maybe an owner of a company. How important is that to have your family backing when it comes to the pursuit of such a long pursuit that you're trying to find a solution to something like you did? Take us through that.
First of all, Gabe, I love that you talk that way with your daughter, because it's not only a business skill, it's a life skill. It's a human skill, psychology, as you both well know. So I love that. And that's how it works, right? When we talk about these things very naturally with our kids, it's not a lesson. It is, but it's not set up as a lesson. It's just part of a conversation. And that's what they absorb. And that's what they grow up to use in their life. So, I always tell my kids, that 4-year-old that said Bill Finger a bunch of times, she's 21 now. But I used to tell them that, nothing worthwhile comes easy. If you want something, you have every right to express that. And other people might not agree with you or help you, but don't let that deter you, because you're the only one that is you. You're the star of your life. So if someone else doesn't like what you're doing, don't give up because of them. They're not going to be there in 5 or 10 years. They're not going to sleep with you. They're not walking down the street with you. They're just another person. So that what you do, I think, this is not about parenting advice, but I think that really does have a big impact on kids. And I'll give you one example. So my son, who's now 17, when he was about, I would say 14 or 15, even earlier than that, he got into lacrosse. Not for me. I've never done that. So we bought this huge, I don't even know what it's called. It's almost as tall as the second story of our house, this net in the backyard, which he used maybe 3 times. And then it just collected dust. So after a couple of years of this, we said, if you're not going to play lacrosse anymore, we've got to get this thing out of here. So his friend wanted it, but again, it was so big. I forget how we got it. We must've put it together, but we didn't want to take it apart to get rid of it. So his friend said, well, it doesn't fit in my parents' car. So my son one day flagged down a UPS truck on our street, our dead end street. And he said, would you be able to drive this over to my friend's house? It's just 3 blocks away, but it doesn't fit in his car. And the guy said, we're not really supposed to do that. And my son just said, I know, but if you don't mind, we have no other way to do it. So the UPS guy did it. They came back here, they took the thing out of the backyard, and he drove. And I said, see, that's what I mean. You never know if you don't ask. So that was one of my big mantras for this whole story is, people sometimes would say, don't bother with that person. They're not going to know anything. And I said, I'm going to try anyway. Or I would sometimes get into sensitive territory, asking about deaths and funerals and sexuality and other topics that, a lot of people are not expecting to cover when they're talking about Batman. And it gets, people get emotional, but that's being human. And so I just would say, I totally understand that this is tough. Please understand that I have to ask. It doesn't mean you have to answer, but I'm hoping you will. And usually people, if you ask with a smile and not too much pressure, they often come around.
That's great. And your story reminds me of when we were younger, we ended up moving a trampoline on top of a car with everyone walking around it to my friend's house because we couldn't get it there either. So
Yeah.
funny story. But you've said every change starts with one person. What advice do you give to someone who really wants to make a difference but feels like they're underqualified or overwhelmed and doesn't really have a start with just themselves?
Well, there's this quote that I picked up somewhere, and if you Google it, you'll see it's the headline for a bunch of articles, which is that we're all just winging it all the time. I mean, even people that are senior level in their careers, very experienced people, we still wake up with uncertainty, with doubt, and no guarantee of any success going forward. So when you equalize us that way, I find that to be very empowering. So that's how what I think about. Like, I get just as frustrated as the next guy. I don't know if it showed in the movie. I mean, they weren't filming me as this was all actually happening. It was done after. But if they were filming when it was actually happening, there were, nights where I was in a, bad mood, or I was disappointed, or I felt like it wasn't going to succeed. But those feelings go away or start to slip away after a good night's sleep. And then the next day you still remember them, but you are renewed and you think, I'm going to keep trying. So believe me, I have really low moments like everybody, but I also remind myself that everybody fails at some point, and I sometimes remind myself of specific examples. I mean, like Abraham Lincoln, there's a whole litany of things that he failed at before he became president, and not little things like getting fired, not getting into law school, running for office multiple times and losing and going bankrupt. I mean, like big life issues. And look what happened to him. So I just remind myself that we all have just as much a chance as anybody if we don't give up. So it sounds a little pat, sounds like an office poster, like a cliche, but for me, it works. Just reminding myself that we're all winging it and everyone has just as much a chance as anyone else if you use your voice.
That's amazing. So you've turned this story into a global mission, right? You have literally spoken in front of audiences all over the world. And what is that message? How does that message resonate? And what are the things that you're typically hearing from stories of people that share with you after hearing your message?
It's been such a privilege. A lot of people become a writer because they're introverts. They want to be alone and work at their desk and not interact. And I like that sometimes, but I also like telling stories. And I'm just as happy doing it on a stage as I am on a page. So it's been, but I didn't plan on that. When I started writing, I didn't even know that writers spoke. I was so young and naive. I had no clue that would be a thing. And what's really nice about this story is that I'm speaking to all ages. I mean, I write a lot for kids, so I've spoken to countless youth audiences, but also lots of adult audiences. And the story has legs for everybody. And the nice thing about it is, with any captive audience, probably half that group couldn't care less about superheroes and Batman in particular. They just couldn't care less. But they have to be there, whether it's a conference or a school or whatever the case may be. And they see within just a couple of minutes, if not less, that, okay, this is not what I thought it was going to be. This is something that I'm going to naturally, they're not thinking this out loud, but the story wins them over. That's, again, a writer's dream. It's really a human drama. I mean, my wife could not care less about superheroes. She probably openly hates them, actually. But, she's the first to say, this is a good story. And not just because I'm married to the guy. It is just objectively a good story. So it's nice to have that as a storyteller, a story that, I can whip out at any time. And, whether I have a minute or an hour and people will be engaged. It's just such an unusual series of events that happened. And after speaking about it so often to youth audiences, where there are still adults in the room, of course, I had so many adults come up to me and say, I'm blown away by this. I think it's great that you're talking about this with kids. If you're not also speaking about it to adults, people trying to find their way, business people, or anyone really, you should be, because there's a lot of messages there that would resonate with that age range. And I said, I would love to. I love what I'm doing now, but it took me a while to come around to that. But yeah, it has legs. And it when I'm speaking in other countries, I'm obviously still speaking English. But they're international groups. And again, Batman needs no introduction. And I am just very heartened how emotional people get about it. Sometimes they're more emotional than I've ever been. I mean, I've had people crying, and after the movie came out, we got tweets almost, I mean, I don't know exactly, but it was a lot of tweets for many, many weeks. And some of these people were saying really humbling and just emotional things like, Batman was the center of my family's core, I was crying through the whole movie, and at the end I stood up and cheered. I mean, I tell people, I know it's about Batman, but if you give it a chance, you'll see why that person said that. It's not going to have the same effect on everybody. But, and one interesting thing, Gabe, to your point about how this has affected people, after the movie came out, I started to get messages from people that were saying things like, my grandfather invented the big wheel tricycle, or my grandmother invented peanut butter and jelly in a jar. I'm making these, I don't remember the specifics, but can you help me get credit for that? And I have like 30 of these. And I mean, and they're all interesting, but I said, I don't have 9 extra years to spare to help that. But I think it's a valid, you have a cause there. I think you should take it on, and you can what I've done would be some small blueprint, but you don't need me really. There's ways to do it. And frankly, some of them might be crackpots. I don't know. Maybe they're not telling the truth, or they don't know the truth, but some of it's interesting stuff. So there's just so many untold stories out there. I wish one of them was a great one that I had to jump on. None of them were my, thing, but this story does that to people. It activates that idea that, if they can change the Batman credit line after 70 years, then I can get justice for my family member, or we can make this right, which is a great feeling. That's out in the atmosphere.
Yeah.
I'm not taking credit for it. It predates me, but this reminds people.
Yeah. Hearing that feedback from so many people has to be such a good feeling. And after finally getting the Bill Finger the credit he deserved, getting him in the credit line, how did your understanding of the word legacy change personally and professionally?
That's a great question. It probably didn't change, but what did change is the importance of fighting for that. Some people would say their legacy is not important, and those people are really, some of the most interesting people, because they're just humble. Like the people that did something extremely notable, and their gravestone just has their name. Not maybe their name is so notable that they don't need to put their accomplishment, but some are not like that. Some are just people that did something important that's almost behind the scenes. Like we all have, TVs and cell phones and other things that we couldn't tell you who created that, who's the person that's credited for that idea. But I believe it's important. People often ask me about legacy, and they ask a lot of people about legacy. And I mean, I would, my legacy, I would just like to be that I was kind to people. And this is an extension of that. But I think it's really nice when we can help boost other people's legacy. And that's what I was trying to do here. I never met Bill. This was not personal for me in that sense. There was no guarantee that I would gain anything from this, to be honest. If someone told me at the beginning, well, you're going to put in the time and it's going to happen, but you're not going to make any money from it. You're not going to sell the book. There's no movie on the horizon. Would you still do it? And my sense is that I would have. I don't know that I could have put in as much time, but I would have tried, because it was important to me. I just feel it makes a statement about what we owe each other, which is to recognize each other's abilities and accomplishments. I mean, that, and you see it on LinkedIn all the time, people that are using their platform to boost others.
Right. No, it's interesting because, I mean, just to the last point, LinkedIn is like the only social platform out there that there's still kind people on it. It's kind of interesting. I saw you speak and you said this line and it stuck with me. And I'd love to have you unpack it, if you don't mind, that your story doesn't end in a period. It ends in a ... Can you take us through what that means and how that moves your audience members around the world?
Yes, that I find it to be very personally motivating, because this story was a living example of how much we don't know about something that's so iconic. I mean, actually, a couple of people in the process told me, so-called experts, Mark, there's nothing more to learn about Bill Finger. And I said, there's nothing more to learn? What are his parents' names? Where did he go to college? What did he do when he wasn't writing? How many marriages did he have? People knew nothing about him. They knew his broad strokes, but they didn't know who he was as a person. And I needed to know that to write a book about him. It can't just be a list of what he did. No one wants to read that. You need to know the personality and the essence of a soul. So here's one example. I was looking for, really anything I could find on Bill that predated Batman. And I thought if I knew his middle initial, that would open up more. You could find more records that way. It's what could be one letter, but it could open up a world of possibilities. So I asked his second wife, Lynn, who I got to speak with and meet with in person, what was his middle name? And she said, I don't think he had one, but his real first name wasn't Bill. She just dropped that out there like she was saying good morning. I said, what do you mean his real name wasn't Bill? She said, yeah, his birth name was something else, but he didn't like it, so he didn't like to talk about it. And I said, and she's 85 years old. I was on the phone with her at the time, and I said, oh, Lynn, I totally understand. I respect that he didn't want people to talk about it, but in the name of scholarship, would you be willing to tell me what it was? And she said, it was Milton, but he wouldn't want that published. So we talked for 5 more minutes, and I said, Lynn, I think it would be really important, for the story if I could mention that in the book. Do you think it'd be okay if I mention that? And she said, oh, okay. So in 5 minutes, she went from saying, don't mention it to, sure, you can publish it. So that's what I mean about just try. And you just never know where the story actually ends. So if I just accepted that his name was Bill Finger and we're not going to know his middle name, then I would have cut out a lot of information that I learned from that. Like I found his high school yearbook photo, which I couldn't find her before because I was looking for Bill Finger and there wasn't one. So every story ends in a period and a ... because you never know. They find artifacts from centuries ago that rewrite what we think we knew. The Rosetta Stone rewrote what we thought we knew about language. So that's very empowering, just to think that nothing is, even the thickest books don't have it all about that topic. So you never know if you're going to find the next thing that makes a difference. Only asking questions will help you find it.
What a great story, man. Thank you so much for being on the show. Let's plug you. Let's have our audience members find out who is the right person to reach out to you. How do they get a hold of you, and what can you provide them in your speaking engagements?
Thank you for asking. So it's just me. I'm a one-man band. I have a website, which is just my name, Marc Tyler Nobleman. I'm on social media. I'm on LinkedIn. I speak to audiences of all kinds and all ages all over the world. So if you're looking for a really rousing opening session, or to get people in the mood to learn and to be open to some of the more drier material that might be in the conference, which I'm just told is a known thing, or if you want something rousing at the end to end with a bang, this story works. And again, it works even for people that don't like superheroes. So Batman, I'm just his sidekick. I ride his cape tails on this, and it works a lot of the time to make people realize how important each one of us is when it comes to making change. You don't need an army. You don't need to have the support of a company. You can just have a vision and some time, and you can make things happen. And this story just brings that home. So if anybody wants to talk about more about my talks, I'm happy to hear from you.
Marc, thank you so much for your time. When we watched the documentary, our whole entire family looked at each other and said, that's the epitome of doing hard things. What you did for that family and for that, for that brand. It's unbelievable. First off, all the audience members, reach out to Marc so you can have him speak at your events. Connect with him. Definitely watch the documentary. It's powerful in a big, big way. And keep doing hard things. We'll see you on the next one.
I'm glad to be doing them with you too. Thank you for having me on the show.